up, family? We are super excited that you are joining us for this episode of Real Raw Conversations today. I believe that this conversation today is really going to bless you, no matter what background you come from. This is really going to be something that you can glean some information that could potentially save some lives. So if you just flip this on and you're unsure if you should continue to watch because it could save a life. And so today we want to bring awareness to the subject of overdose. And we want to honor a man whose life was taken from this world way too soon as a result of an overdose death. In 2018, 67,367 drug overdose deaths occurred in the United States. It's time to shed some light on this subject of overdose and do something as a nation to eradicate it. So this subject is super close to my heart, as well as the heart of my guest today, and the heart of the Hope Project. And we are going to do everything in our power to help eradicate overdose deaths through raising awareness of this epidemic and giving people the life-saving tools that they need to be a part of the solution, y'all. So my guest today is Amanda Hutchison Bull, and Amanda lost her son in 2019. Brandon Lewis Hutchison was born November 10th, 1993, and passed away as a result of an overdose July 15th, 2019. So, Amanda, I'm super, super excited that you're here with us today. I know, again, that this is going to be not easy to talk about, but some people that are listening today need to hear this. And like I said earlier, I think that anyone who has breath in their lungs needs to sit back and lean in today to this conversation, because it's going to be one that's really going to help you be a part of the solution when it comes to eradicating overdose death. So again, welcome, Amanda, and tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us about Brandon's life and who he was.
Hi, Chad. Thanks for having me. Brandon was my oldest child. I have 3 children, and he was my first child. He made me a mom when I was the very young age of 16. So Brandon and I kind of grew up together. Even though I remained diligent as a parent, Brandon was also my friend. He was someone that taught me lessons over and over every single day, how to do things with his brother, how to do things and not do things with his sister, the things that worked, the things that didn't work. Brandon was a bright, shining light of a person. He was a hard worker. He was a great friend. I honestly, even to this day, despite his path, I don't know that I can name one enemy that he ever truly made. Mm. And the response to his overdose and his hospitalization and his death is a true testimony to that, because the village of people that showed up for him and showed up for me, and not just one day, but day after day after day, spoke volumes about the way that he touched other people's lives, the friend that he was. He was the child that, in 5th grade, I was getting phone calls from his teacher, and it's the end of the year, and I'm bracing myself thinking, oh no, what has happened? It's the last day of school. We only have one day left. And instead, what the teacher had to tell me was a story about how Brandon had stepped up and defended a young girl in his class that was slightly mentally handicapped, and they integrated her into normal classrooms for portions of the day. And he stood up to the entire class for her. He sat with her. He participated in a project for the end of the year with her. And this was someone that didn't look like him, that didn't act like him, that didn't learn like him, but instead he always adapted to the needs of other people. And that was the true heart of who Brandon was. He was what other people needed. He was a breath of fresh air. Yeah. He was an honest person. He was someone that you could trust. He loved babies and children. He was so good with them. Always spent a lot of time with his family, stayed in contact with me every day, even after he graduated high school and moved away from home. He loved to fish, loved lots of different genres of music. So his playlist was pretty wide. yeah, that's who Brandon was.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that, man. I really wish that I could have known him. He really, that is a man after my own heart. I was also that kid in middle school and high school and even elementary that I was for the underdog. You know, like
Yeah.
I was the kid that was like, nobody's gonna mess with this person because they look different. And so I don't know. That's not something, I think that's something you're born with, you know, and it's just a really cool trait, and, you know, glory to God for that. And so Brandon was living a little bit of a secret life, and he was suffering from an addiction. And so tell us a little bit about how you discovered he was living that secret life, and he was suffering from this deadly addiction.
Well, to be completely honest, I was in denial for a long time, and I didn't want to acknowledge what in my heart I did know to be true, because anything that I had ever heard about heroin or known about heroin, I didn't know any success stories. Um, you hear about celebrities, you hear about famous people or the family members of famous people who have overcome addiction, but as a whole, we don't really see celebrities. We don't see those people as us, as real people, as equals. And I didn't want to give this disease a name. I didn't want it to have a face, and I didn't want it to be living inside of my child.
Yeah.
So denial played a huge role for about 2 years. Like I said, even though I knew that something was wrong, and I just kept hoping that if I ignored it long enough, that it was going to go away, it would run its course.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, what we know about addiction is that it never goes away, and it doesn't run its course. And if it does, it usually results in ending someone's life.
Yeah.
That is the course that addiction runs. So Brandon had always worked for my dad in a family business, and my dad had started to have some conversations with my mom, and my mom was having conversations with me that Brandon's behavior was starting to atrophy from the way he had always been. And as the addiction in him mutated, as well as the drugs that he was using, his behavior started to mutate. And it was so out of character for him that to hear these things, at first I started to put them in the back of my mind. And I'm like, oh, well, he probably was just up really late the night before. Maybe that's why he's nodding off at work. Maybe that's why he doesn't have memory retention. Maybe he's distracted. He has a lot going on. He's living an adult life. I was excusing away all of these indicators that are red flags once you really accept that your loved one is suffering from an addiction of any kind.
Wow.
And eventually, and Brandon remained functional. He paid his bills. He got up and went to work. He still had a social life. He went fishing on the Folly Pier with his friends. He would go fishing with my dad. He was doing all of the normal Brandon things, but then there were these other indicators that kept reoccurring.
Yeah.
And eventually the months started to come where he wasn't paying his cell phone bill. He wasn't paying his car insurance. And, I would ask him and I would question him. And the story that my dad was giving me about the money he was earning was not lining up with the story that Brandon was giving me. So for Brandon to lie to me, that was it. Yeah. Because he never lied to me. He would tell me things as a mother. And I was always that mother that, and I am that mother to my living children, that they can tell me anything. They can talk to me about anything. And it's not going to scare me away. I am not going to run in the other direction. I will help them spearhead any issue head on. Yeah. So for him to lie to me, I knew that there was a serious problem. I knew that there was an issue that he recognized was bigger than me and that was bigger than him. And he was scared to tell me. And eventually that behavior led to my dad having to let Brandon go a few months. A few months into 2018, my dad had to let Brandon go. And Brandon immediately started looking for other work. He had lost his home. At that point, I started to initiate some tough love, and his truck was still in my name. So I told him that if he couldn't pay his financial responsibilities for the truck, I had no choice but to take the tags off. I wasn't going to take it away, but it wasn't going to be my responsibility to provide those things for him. Because I felt like if I started to put some pressure on him, that he would come to me, that he would talk to me and have an honest conversation with me. And that didn't work. It pushed him a little bit further away. He was working with a friend, sleeping on a friend's couch. He lost that job. He went to another friend. He was working with that friend, sleeping on that friend's couch. That ended up coming to an end a few weeks later. And then he went to another family member. He went to his cousins Gina and Lacey's house, and he was staying with them. And we had all behind the scenes, my family and I, been having conversations about staging an intervention and confronting Brandon and not making him tell us, because we knew. And we didn't know that it was heroin, but we knew that it was something bad. Yeah. And it was something that was taking Brandon away from us and replacing those pieces of Brandon with someone that we didn't know. And he was slowly becoming a stranger to us, but there was still so much of Brandon still there, still living, thriving, that he wasn't foreign to us as a person, as a loved one, and he wasn't foreign to me as a son. So I think, and he was smart. He was a smart kid. He was street smart. He had really strong intuition. And the day that we were staging our intervention, Brandon ended up just out of the blue, when he was supposed to be leaving the house with Gina and Lacey to go to my parents' house to meet me. He went out their back door, and we didn't see him again for weeks.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And then when I would try to contact him on his cell phone, because I left his cell phone on, I didn't turn it off, because in my mindset then, if I left his cell phone on, that would give me an open line of communication to contact him. I could find him, I could reach out to him, and most importantly, he could reach out to me. Yeah. But in hindsight, that's not what that did, because he was turning his cell phone off. He was taking the battery out of it so that I couldn't trace the location. He was smart about concealing his addiction from us, because the one thing that Brandon really couldn't live with was disappointing his family, disappointing mostly me, my dad, and my mom. Our opinions of him meant the world to him. So for him to come clean and tell us this, it was the ultimate act for him, because it would have meant that he was admitting the ultimate disappointment in his heart. And so after he had been off the grid for a couple of weeks, he wasn't working. None of his friends had heard from him. His truck was still parked at my parents' house, and couldn't reach him on his cell phone, couldn't trace him on his cell phone. So I reached out for help from local law enforcement. And at the time, Brandon was 24. They wouldn't help. They said that they couldn't make my son talk to me. They couldn't make him communicate with me. You know, kids go through this. He hadn't lived at home in a really long time. And it wasn't a matter of making him talk to me. It was a matter of making sure that he was alive. Yeah. He didn't have to communicate with me, but they could have put forth some effort, and they didn't, because of the elements involved in the situation. And what they overlooked was the fact that I was pleading to them that my son was a drug addict. Yeah. And that I knew that there was dangerous behavior going on in his life that could take his life. And my primary goal was just to keep him alive at that point. It wasn't to talk to him. It wasn't to bring him home. It wasn't to send him away to rehab. It was I just needed to make sure that he was alive, because in my heart, I felt something changing. And as a mother, I think you start to feel the distance when your child drifts away. And I was feeling that. And it was so frustrating, because I felt like there was no help from the people that should have been there to help. Yeah. And I was ready. I was ready to face the truth, and I was ready to face Brandon. I wasn't ready to face the addiction, because I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have money. I didn't have resources. And I had my family, but historically, when things would happen with my children, it was, Amanda, you need to do something. And I would do something. I knew that it was all on me, and I knew that I didn't know what I was doing. That the situation, addiction was all around me. Addiction had never touched me. And so finally, it had been 2 days consecutive that I hadn't heard from him. And I really started to get this feeling that something was wrong, more than I'd ever felt before. And I had prayed about the situation, and finding myself in this life event is ultimately what led me back to the Lord as an adult, because I had strayed far from God for a very long time, and I didn't make time for church. I didn't make it a priority. Being their mother was my priority. Providing was my priority. And as single mothers, I think there are a lot of people, single parents, not just single mothers, but I think that there are a lot of people out there that can relate when I say that I would work 3 jobs at some points in my life to be able to provide a home and necessities for my children, and to maintain stability in that aspect of our life. I didn't make time for church. I didn't teach my children about God. We didn't go to church. We never read the Bible. We never talked scripture, listened to worship. I didn't make that a priority in my life as a mother. And again, in hindsight, that's something that I would definitely do different. But as I started to have this, what I thought at the time was an irrational fear, there was one night where, after not hearing from him for a couple of days and not being able to locate his phone, and I had a series of nightmares that kept me up all night long. And the next morning, I just made a judgment call and decided if law enforcement wasn't going to help me, and the people that I had in my life couldn't help me, that I was going to have to call on the help of the rest of the world. And I took to social media and every platform that I had access to, and I exposed my son's addiction and our family secret. And I exposed that he was missing. I posted pictures of him all over the place that morning, and pictures of the last people that I knew that he was with, because I saw a little Snapchat clip from someone that had him in it 2 days earlier. But when I confronted her about his whereabouts, she claimed she hadn't seen him for weeks. Wow. So I knew that she was lying. I also knew that she was using too. And so pictures that I had of the two of them, the people that I knew was with them, I posted pictures of them. And I knew that if I started a fire, that it would smoke him out, because those people weren't going to want that kind of attention, because once I started, I wouldn't stop. And that was one thing that my son did know about me. And it worked. Within a couple of hours, over 15,000 people on social media shared my post. And I got a phone call from a number that I didn't know, that I didn't recognize. And I picked up the phone, and it was Brandon calling me from a gas station less than a mile from our house. And he told me where he was, and he asked me to come and pick him up. And I asked him if anyone was with him, and he told me no, that he'd gotten dropped off. And when I got there to pick him up, I didn't see him, but we're far past the day and age of payphones. So I'm looking for a payphone, because that's my mindset. I'm aging myself right now. And I got out of the car and I went to go in the gas station. He comes walking out, and I just remember feeling this flood of relief, because again, my primary goal at that point was just to make sure that he was alive. Yeah. And I was going to go from there. And in that moment, I knew that he was alive, and I just wrapped my arms around him, and I just felt this flood of relief. Like, okay, he is still alive. We have a life to work with. We have a life to work on. And the first words out of his mouth when he hugged me back was, "This is not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong." And he said that I was the best mom that anyone could ask for. And when he got in the car, he got in the back seat, and I just kind of sat there. And my plan at that point was to drive him to my parents' house and continue with our intervention. So my whole family was there waiting. And I looked at him, and he looked like Brandon, like in his face and his eyes. And I asked him if he needed anything. I went back in the gas station and got him a few things. And when I came back out, he kind of chuckled and he said, I always knew that you were a warrior, that you would go to the front lines of battle for your kids. He said, I didn't know that you would do this. I said, what do you mean? He said, I walked in that gas station a few minutes ago to call you, and I was waiting in line to ask to use their phone. And this little boy, he must have been about 11, was standing off to the side staring at him. And he kept looking at something in his hands, and it was making Brandon feel a little bit paranoid. So he asked him, he said, are you okay? Do you need something? And the little boy said, no, I'm fine. He turned his hand around and he had his phone in his hand. And he said, but dude, you need to call your mom. And he recognized Brandon from social media. And Brandon told him, he said, I'm waiting in line right now. I'm calling my mom from their phone. And the kid told him, he said, don't worry about that. He said, just use mine. And he handed him his cell phones. And that was how he called me. And he asked me if we were going to his grandparents' house. And I said, yeah. And he asked me if we could go home first. And I said, we can go home for a few minutes. And he said, I'd really just like to sit and talk with you before we go. And he said that he wanted to have a conversation with me before he had a conversation with our family.
Yeah.
I said, okay. So I did that, and I got him home, and it took him about an hour to start talking, and we just sat facing each other. And finally, he looked up at me and he said, I know that there isn't much that I can say that you haven't already figured out, but he said, I'd like to start from the top. He said, I want you to know everything, and I want you to know the truth. He said, because if this is the last opportunity that I have to tell you, he said, you deserve at least that. So he started talking. He told me about, he started talking about when he was in high school, his junior year, and he was hurt really bad in a game, and it took him out of the game, and he was benched for his senior year. And he was talking to me about his experience with pain management therapy and physical therapy and the medications that they prescribed for pain management for him. And then he started to tell me about how it felt the second year after that, when they started to wean him off of that medication, and how something in him had changed, and he felt like he couldn't not take the medication, that he needed it, that his brain, his body, everything was telling him that he needed it. And that he had started to buy the medication. And then when that medication wasn't available, those pills, it was a different pill, and then it was a different pill, and then it was a different pill. And eventually it just got so hard for him to find what it was that he was looking for, that someone approached him and they said, hey dude, you know what? I know something that will do the same thing. It's just as effective. This is going to help you out. It's a lot cheaper. And Brandon said, okay. And that was the first time that he tried heroin. And he said that it was a game changer, and he knew it the first time that he did it, because there was no period of time after that he could go without being sick, without his mind taking control and chasing that drug. And it was a game changer.
Wow.
Changed everything. There was no going back after the first time that he tried heroin. And again, Brandon remained functional, maintained a lot of the things in his life up until the few months, when he had been missing, when he had left my family's house. And I asked him, I said, why didn't you just tell me? Why didn't you just talk to me? We've walked out everything else in life. Why not this? And he said, because when I tell you, it makes it real. And then I know I have to acknowledge it. I have to admit it. I have to live it. And he said that before that day, he said he didn't know that he was ready. And I asked him if he was ready. And he said, I'm ready today. I'm ready right now. And he said, I will do anything that you tell me to. He said, please just tell me that you have a plan. And I lied. I said that I had a plan, and I didn't have a plan. And in my mind, this side of my mind is racing. This side of my mind is trying to stay calm, to keep him calm, because fear plays a huge part in addiction, in active usage, and in detoxing. And I didn't want him to be scared. I wanted him to feel like telling me the truth and coming to me was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
So on the outside, I was cool and collected, and I told him, I said, okay, I said, I'll do this with you. And I told him, I said, but I'm only going to do this once, because this is going to be enough for both of our lifetimes, is once.
Yeah.
And he said, okay. He said, just tell me what to do. And I decided not to go to my parents' house, not to expose him to my family, and not to put him through that, because he was receptive. He was ready. He was willing. He was eager. I didn't need all of those people in the room with me confronting him, because I knew that they were backing me up from behind the scenes,
Right.
but I didn't need it. And it took me a couple of days to find out about detox. My mom was helping me because I couldn't be on the phone. I couldn't leave him alone. He gave me his cell phone the minute that he came home. He didn't have any contact with the outside world. And for me to be the one moving all of those parts, it created paranoia in him. And it was just a very uncomfortable situation. So we holed up in a room together while my mom made phone call after phone call for day after day. And finally, she told me that I needed to take him to the hospital, and which hospital to take him to get him into an emergency bed in the detox clinic downtown. And Brandon and I had been holed up in a room for 3 days. That was when we started reading the Bible together. And that was when we started praying together, because he was so sick. He was so sick physically. He was sick emotionally. He was sick mentally. Just in everything that encompasses. He was just so sick. Yeah. And the only thing that I knew in that time that would be able to make him better before the next step we had to take was to pray about it, to pray to God, to pray to take that out of him. And then when I took him to the hospital, we had literally walked in the door, and 3 minutes later, Brandon went into cardiac arrest. And the trauma unit came out, and they triaged him back. And less than an hour later, they walked me back into this room, and he is vibrant and alive and sitting in this bed with all this stuff on him, like nothing had happened. And I'm like, what did they do? And he's like, I don't know, but I was praying. And I was like, wow, okay. And they admitted him there. They gave him some medication to keep him calm, to stabilize his heart and his blood pressure. And then they moved him to a different part of the hospital. And they told me that they just had to wait for the phone call for the bed at the other hospital, and that I could leave. And I didn't want to leave. I was terrified that the minute I walked out of the hospital, he was gonna leave too. He would call somebody to come and pick him up. And so I left, but I get to my car, and then I sit in the parking lot for a little bit, and then God just tells me that I have to trust him, and that I have to go, and I have to do my part if I'm going to expect Brandon to do his part. So I did, and I left, and I got the phone call around midnight to come back and get him. And I went back, and he was still there, walking around with a big smile on his face. And we loaded up in the car, and we drove downtown. I took him to the Charleston Center, and he was reassuring me this entire time, when I felt like I was the one that was going to be playing that role. But 3 days later, I got a phone call that he didn't need detox, that he didn't need to stay there. They couldn't keep him there. They couldn't use that bed for someone like Brandon, because he wasn't sick anymore, and he didn't need medication, and they had to send him home. So I gathered my things at my office and I had to leave again. And I went and picked him up. And when he finally came downstairs, there he is with this big smile again. And he like wrapped his arm around me. And I said, "What in the world are you doing?" And I remember him like flexing his arm at me. And he's like, "Strong like bull, Mom, strong like bull." And just laughing and smiling. And I had to check myself in that moment, because what I was seeing was what was happening that day. But that didn't mean that it was going to carry over into the next day or the next hour. I didn't know what to expect when we got home. And I had to remember that there was still a beast inside of my boy that at all costs was going to fight to win. And it took me about a month to find what I was looking for, because what I was looking for rehabilitation for Brandon was a faith-based ministry, something that would instill in him what I felt I had failed to do when he was younger. And I knew that the only thing that was going to save him was going to be the grace of God, and that he was going to need faith in order to make that happen. And I didn't know if he had faith. The night that I took him to Trident, when he went into cardiac arrest, if he had died that night, I don't know where my son would have been. Yeah. I don't know what he believed. I don't know who he believed in. I don't know if he knew a word of scripture. I didn't know if he prayed. Everything was so uncertain at that time. So I knew that my next move for him had to be what would save him, whether he lived or died.
Amen.
And wow. That was what I went for.
Wow. And
I found the Haven of Rest in Anderson, South Carolina. And we drove up there. It's like 4.5 hour drive. And it was a long drive. And we talked and laughed and joked the whole way. And, I kept having to remind myself that, yes, this was Brandon. And yes, he was in there, but he wasn't in there alone. Yeah, and that Satan was working really hard on him. And I knew through the trials of my own life that Satan wasn't only working on my son. Satan was working on me by using my son, because all of the things that he had schemed and plotted and thrown at me that should have been meant to take me out, none of that had worked. But I knew that because of the prayers that I'd spoken out loud, I knew that Satan knew that the way to really take me down was one of my children. And I checked him in, and I wasn't ready. He kept telling me he was ready. He was still reassuring me. He's like, "Mom, this is a good thing. This is a good thing." He said, "You don't have to be scared. You don't have to be worried." But that was the furthest I'd ever been from my kids. And it was a first for me. Yeah. And I was scared to leave him there alone, because if he wanted to leave, he could. But I knew that my fear couldn't keep him there. So I had to replace it with my faith that he was going to do this, and that he was going to stay there. He was going to get better, and that's where he would be healed. And that was what I prayed out loud. I prayed it out loud because I needed to hear it. And other people weren't telling me that. So the only way for me to hear it was to pray it out loud to God, because then I could hear my own prayers and I could hear myself, and it became an affirmation. And I prayed the same prayer for him over and over every single day that he was gone. And he was there for a year. Within his first 2 months, he called me and told me, it was a Saturday night, and he's like, "Hey, Mom, I have big news. I know I'm not scheduled to call you tonight, so I'm glad you answered." He said, "But I have big news about tomorrow." I said, "What's tomorrow?" And he said, "I am being baptized tomorrow at Temple Baptist Church." And I said, "What? Brandon, honey, this is not enough notice. It's not enough time. I can't be there. I have something going on in the morning. Can we make it another time?" And he stopped me and he said, No. He said, "Mom, this is not for you." He said, "This is for me." Amen. He said, "And I will do it by myself, without my family and my friends."
Take your time.
He said, "I will do this by myself, without my family and friends."
Take your time.
He said, because I will be in the presence of my Lord and Savior.
Amen. Amen.
And chat, in that moment, that was all I'd ever wanted to hear. It was what I had prayed for. It's what I had hoped for. And it was a gift that I had prayed that God would give me and him, because I wasn't convinced that, until that point, I wasn't convinced that he would make it the year, that he would stay the year, that he would, I wasn't convinced that he would successfully be able to beat this.
Yeah.
And in that moment, I became convinced that he was going to come home healed, and that he would live a long life and be a husband and a father, and that he would be the one burying me with his brother and his sister under his wing. I was convinced that day. And so the next day he was baptized, and that was on July 15th of 2018.
Wow.
He came home in February of 2019, and he got home and he hit the ground running. He was spending a lot of time with family. He was going to church every Sunday. He was involved. He got into a small group through another church.
Wow.
For addiction. And he was doing the things that I saw as a person in recovery would need to do when they come home from rehabilitation. But what I failed to realize in those times were that his year at the Haven wasn't the end of the road. He wasn't healed from his addiction. He was in recovery from his addiction.
Yeah.
But that was the beginning of the road. And I didn't have enough knowledge. I didn't educate myself enough to know that when he came home, he needed to be going to meetings. He needed to be doing things differently. I needed to be doing things differently. And I changed a lot of things about my lifestyle, but there are some things that I didn't change that that I don't necessarily know if they were a contributor to his relapse, but now I'll never know. So there are things that I wish I would have changed. But who are we to say, if anything were different, that the outcome would be different? He was working odd jobs at first to pay his fines to reinstate his license. He finally got that done. He got his license back. He was so proud of himself. He got a better job after that. And then after the landscaping job that he worked for a few months, then he got a job working for a company called Pasco, and they were training him, and he was learning new things, and he was gaining certifications, and he was doing real life things.
Yeah.
And new things, different things that he never thought he would be able to accomplish. And the journals that he gave to me while he was at the Haven are a true testament to what Brandon thought he would never do. He never thought that he would. He wrote on New Year's Day while he was there that he woke up and he was giving God all the glory for him waking up and being able to live another day, and that he never thought that he could be that happy and be sober. He never thought he could be that happy with drugs. And those journals gave me insight that Brandon was living, but otherwise I wouldn't have had the opportunity to have a conversation with him about, and how every single day he had doubt. He had doubt that he could stay in recovery. He had doubt that he could live a life without drugs. He had doubt that he would even be alive. And he was living his life, and he had a relationship, and he had his friends again, and he was fishing again. He was going to movies and concerts, and doing the things that you do when you're living
Right.
this normal, sober life, the things that make you happy and are fun. And then his sister, my daughter Maddie, graduated in June of 2018, and he texted me and told me that he wasn't feeling well and that he didn't think he was going to be able to make her graduation, but that he would make it up to her. And there was my first red flag. And I called him, and he got on the phone, and I said, your sister graduates high school once. You yourself have said 100 times that you're lucky to be alive. You're lucky to be here. Act like you're lucky. Act like you are blessed.
Yeah.
I said, respond to the favor that God has graced you with by showing up, even if you don't feel well. I do a lot of things every day that I don't feel like doing either. And I was tough loving him again. And he's like, yes, ma'am. I'm going to get up. I'm going to shower. I'm going to try to eat some crackers, and I'll be there. And he was there physically. But Brandon didn't look like he was of sound mind. And we all know now, at least I know, that relapse occurs mentally long before it manifests physically.
That's right.
And he was mentally struggling, emotionally he was struggling, and he wasn't talking about it. He didn't want to scare me. He wanted to protect me. He didn't want to scare his family. But another thing that I've learned is that secrecy and shame is the breeding ground for addiction, for relapse, for death.
So true.
You can't not talk about it. You can't let that fear take a hold of you, because you don't want to instill fear in the people that can help you, that will walk through this with you.
Yeah, that's so true.
And he never said a word. He still texted me every day, every morning. As soon as he got up, it was, good morning, Mom. Hope you have a great day. I love you a lot. I love you the most. He was still keeping that contact with me every day, but he wasn't talking about the real things.
Yeah.
And I was supposed to see him the night before his relapse in July, but he said that he was just going to stay in that night. He said that he didn't want to come out, that he would try to make it next time, and that he was his girlfriend was leaving the next morning to leave for a week to go out of town on vacation with her family, and he said that he was going to see me that day instead, and that he was going to spend that night with her, get up early, take her to the airport, and he did. That was a Thursday, and he woke up and he took her to the airport. He went to work. He went to lunch. He went back to work. And when he got off work, he went to an ATM and took out some money, and then went to meet a guy to buy some heroin. And it was just a few minutes later that he was discovered in his car on the side of the road on Rivers Avenue. Unresponsive, head down. His car was running. The doors were locked. One of the windows was cracked a little bit, and there was a couple that stopped. I mean, hundreds of cars drove past him. It was rush hour in Charleston, and no one stopped except one car. And the woman and her husband and her 17-year-old daughter got out, and they have a special needs child in their family. So the mom and daughter were certified in CPR. The mom was small enough, tiny enough to reach her arm in through that window to pull the lock up on the car door. And her husband, thank goodness he was a big guy, because Brandon was a big kid. Yeah. And he pulled him out of the car and laid him flat in the ditch. And the mom started doing CPR. And she was so tiny and Brandon was so big. Her daughter, her 17-year-old daughter, told her, she's like, get off of him. You have to do it harder than that. She's like, Mom, break his ribs if you have to, but you're not pushing hard enough. And that 17-year-old girl sat on top of my son and performed chest compressions and mouth to mouth with him until EMS arrived.
Wow.
And I was at a concert that night on Daniel Island with some friends, and I didn't have my car. We had Ubered there. We were going to Uber back. And his girlfriend texted me and asked me if he was with me because she couldn't get in touch with him. And I knew something was wrong immediately. And I tried texting him because where I was really loud, and he didn't text me back. And then I tried calling him, and it rang straight through to his voicemail. And I texted him again, and I said, I won't tell anyone where you are or what you're doing, but I need to know if you're okay.
Yeah.
And when he didn't respond back to me then, I left. I called an Uber and I left my friends there, and they were all asking me what was wrong. And I told them I didn't know, but something was wrong. And when Uber got there, I was on the phone with Trident Hospital and on the phone with a doctor that couldn't tell me why my son had been admitted, but he confirmed that he had been, that he was there. And he told me that I needed to get there as soon as I could. And when I got there, the girl in the emergency room behind the desk knew who I was. I came in, I was running, I was out of breath. And she took me through some double doors, never said a word. No one ever said anything to me. No one prepared me. I didn't know what I was walking into. And she walked me into the room where he was, and my son was laying in a hospital bed on life support. That relapse had cost him his life.
Wow. Mm.
He was on a ventilator. He had tubes and wires coming out of him everywhere. He still had dirt on his forehead from his work day. His work shirt had been cut to push down around him so that they could put everything on him. And I knew the minute that I walked into that room that it was finished, that my prayers for restoration and recovery for Brandon, what I thought they were going to look like, God had something very different in mind. And I knew, and I was accepting of that the minute I walked in the room, and no one else believed me. The doctors were going to give him 3 days to see if he had any brain activity that was restored. And everyone kept telling me he was going to pull through and he was going to be fine. And I said, you're right, he is. He's fine. Mm. And in my heart, my son died on July 11th. He wasn't pronounced dead until July 15th, but I knew that he had been called home. And it wasn't until about a week later that I realized that the day that Brandon had herniated in the hospital and that his body really stopped working was 1 year from the day that he had been baptized.
Wow.
Yeah. So he was restored.
Yeah.
There was salvation for him. And in my heart, he is a success story, regardless of how all of this turned out. Like I said, a year earlier had Brandon died, I don't know how I would have lived with the internal turmoil, not knowing where my son's soul had ended up.
Yeah.
Because, in my faith, we are in heaven or we are in hell. And Brandon was not a believer a year before this happened.
Yeah.
But 1 year to the day before it happened, he proclaimed his faith publicly with an act of declaration that he was giving his life to the Lord, that he had truly been saved by grace through his faith.
Yeah. Gosh. Wow, Amanda. I was actually going to bring that up because I had heard you talk about July 15th, that he had been baptized, and then he passed on July 15th, a year later. I think that, we serve a God who wants to talk to us and communicate with us so bad. And, I just know that through that God was trying to, and I think that's what you're saying, is God was just trying to say, it's okay. I've got him. It's okay. And, I agree with you 100%. He's a success story. He is a success story. Man, you got him into a place to where he could really put his faith in Jesus. And that's so important. It's so important. Thank you so much for sharing all that. My next question for you is, I just want to know, if there's someone that's watching today that has a son or a daughter, or maybe just a loved one that is suffering from a deadly addiction, what would you say to them today?
My advice to them would be that first and foremost, they've got to give it to God.
Yeah.
And I am not a vintage Christian by any means. I am not a Bible thumper. I am a believer. Amen. And I have lived and witnessed true miracles. My son's story doesn't stop on the day that he died. I made a choice to donate his organs, and the story about donating his organs and how I allocated his organs to specific people through chained connections in my church. He never should have been a match to the people that I allocated them to. Yeah. Scientifically, medically, the doctors told those people at the hospital that night, you're not all going to be a match. It doesn't happen. And it did happen.
Wow.
It did happen. And the doctors were baffled. And since then, those men, 4 and 6 hours post-op, were up walking around, ringing the organ donation bell of life. And they have been in remission since. One man, this was his 3rd kidney transplant, and he's young. He's only in his 30s. So knowing the elements of Brandon's story, his life, his recovery, his death, I have witnessed miracles, because that is a true miracle. When a doctor looks at you and tells you that medicine tells him that it's not going to work, and it works anyway.
Amen.
People can say what they want to say. I know who did that.
Yeah, come on.
I know who did that.
Come on.
And I know that when my son relapsed, when my son went in the hospital, the peace that I felt on my shoulders, God telling me, I've got you. Yeah. I know that this is hard. I know that this is going to be painful, but you are going to live.
Yeah.
You are going to live. You are going to be a good mother to your living children. You are going to get your family through this. You are going to glorify my name through your son's death, in which you always said would kill you. That, to me, is a miracle. And you have to pray about it. You've got to give it to God. When it's bigger than us, when it is bigger than what we have known to fix every other thing in our life, you've got to try it. Why not? Yeah. People that see the way that I have been hit so hard in life and have lived through those hits, what they have witnessed through my behavior, through my faith, through my words, through my actions, people finally, they get curious and they ask me, they're like, how in the world did you do this? How are you still overcoming? Like, how are you functioning? How are you living? How are you doing so well? And it's only by the grace of God. And that is what I will tell them when they get curious enough to reach out and ask me, because that is the truth. That is my answer. And there is nothing in this world that you can give me or that you can take from me that will ever make me want to be far from that.
Yeah.
And so I gave this problem to God. I gave my son to God and asked him, begged him. I didn't barter with him, and I wasn't praying small prayers. It was big prayers. It was heal my son, restore my son. And at the end of the day, it didn't look like what I thought it was going to look like, but it looks like restoration.
Yeah.
It looks like restoration, and it looks like grace, and it looks like all of the good things that God has to give us if we will just put our faith in him.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of things that we can't see in this world. So why not put our trust in something that we know, even though we can't see it? This is a God that works miracles.
Yes, that's so
and
good.
he will show himself to us that way.
So what are some things that loved ones of people who are addicted, what are some things that they can do to help, that, maybe the top 3 things that they can do to help that loved one?
I guess it depends on their loved one's walk, because I know that a lot of families are exhausted, they're worn out, they're tapped out. They've bared a burden for so long, and they have attempted so many times. They feel hopeless. And I remember Brandon telling me the day that he came home after he had been missing for a little while, he told me, he said, I just want to thank you for never giving up on me, for never turning your back on me, for never giving me money when I asked you to, for never giving me the things that I needed to keep using drugs. He said, I know that was hard for you. He said, but my friends that I'm leaving behind today, he said, their moms could care less. And if they do care, they are helpless. They feel helpless. They don't know what to do. They're alone and they're isolated. And that stuck with me, because I can't imagine Brandon taking the step that he took if he didn't know that he could take that step toward me.
Yeah.
Him describing that his other friends that he was leaving behind, he was leaving them behind alone.
Yeah.
So connecting with local nonprofits, connecting with harm reduction, the people that you have in your life have to be people that are going to support you in this fight, who are going to be with you when the rubber meets the road and it's really time to start making some headway. They are going to have to be people who are going to fight with you and fight for you, and fight for your loved one. So those types of connections are imperative.
Yes.
Because let's face it, rehabilitation, detox, recovery, it's expensive. It's not free. It takes a lot of work. It's not something that we can just write a check for. Not normal, everyday working class people. I know I couldn't.
Right.
And there are resources out there that are available. It's not going to be the first phone call you make. It might not be the 100th phone call that you make, but it might be the 101st phone call that you make.
That's right.
And if you have those people in your life, because you have a special need that most people don't have, or a lot of people, I would say, don't have in their life. And we are the ones that are going to have to do that work, because when someone who is struggling with addiction reaches a point where they want to surrender to help, they're going to be lost. They are going to be helpless, and they are going to need you. And I know it's exhausting, but the decisions that we make for the loved ones that are hurting themselves over and over and over, it's important to understand they don't mean to hurt you.
Yeah.
They're not trying to hurt you. They're fine every single day that they live in addiction just to hurt themselves.
Yeah.
They're not trying to project that onto other people, even though by default it does hurt us. But we have to rise above that. We have to be stronger than that. We have to be better than that. And we have to be ready and armed. And the only way that we are going to be ready to face this with our loved one is if we are already connected, if we have already sought out resources, write them down, keep a journal, keep a log, keep in contact, because there is going to be a day where you're going to need them.
Yeah.
And
So
even if
wise.
it's not for your loved one, even if it's not for your loved one, because those phone calls that my mom made, that I made, all of the steps that we took for my son, for Brandon, that was the only time we ever had to do that. But I have had to do it at least 100 times over the last 13 months since he died, for other people,
Yeah.
for strangers, people that I don't know, people that are lost that reach out to me and they're like, can you please tell me I have this situation? What do I do?
Yeah.
Not where can I go? Who do I talk to? What do I do? Because they have no idea.
Yeah.
And so often, if you're not prepared, you run out of time, because in the mind of someone who is struggling with addiction, the window of opportunity for recovery, it closes so quickly, and it's only open a crack to begin with. So you have to beat the clock. And the only way to be able to do that is to be educated, to have that knowledge ready for the fight.
Yeah. That is so great. So man, this has been just has been amazing. I mean, your story is so courageous. I mean, you are so courageous and brave to be able to share all this. And thank you so much for sharing your wisdom today. I know that some people are going to watch this, and it is really going to hopefully wake some people up to some very real issues that are in a lot of lives right now, especially during this pandemic, when the mental health rates have gone up, and the addiction rates. I heard a number the other day that are up 30%. Overdoses are up. Everything is up right now, and this is an issue that is not going anywhere. Matter of fact, it is getting worse right now. So I just thank you so much for everything you shared. And is there anything else that you'd like to share with us today that you just feel like people need to know?
Yes, I know that often when you have a child or a loved one who is struggling with addiction, that you don't tell your coworkers about it. You don't tell the people that you go to church with about it. You don't want to tell your friends. Sometimes it's because of shame. Sometimes it's because you're embarrassed. Don't be ashamed. Don't be embarrassed. I don't have one person in my life anymore that is not directly affected by addiction, or that has been directly affected by addiction. The only way that we are going to be able to abolish the stigma that feeds this disease is to talk about it, to have conversations about it. Every opportunity that I have to talk about my son, to talk about his addiction, his death, the things that have followed afterwards, I would be disobedient not to share what I know.
Amen.
And what I know to be true is that I went public to bring my son home, and out of obligation to the social media communities that helped bring him home, I continued to share his story every step of the way through recovery, through rehabilitation, through his baptism, every phone call that I had with him. I kept nothing private for me, because I didn't feel like those things were for me. I had them anyway.
Yeah.
But to not share those moments, those conversations, that progress, even when there wasn't progress, when the phone would ring and I would feel scared because I didn't know what was coming on the other end of the line, I shared everything. And it took me a few days from the time that Brandon had relapsed while he was in the hospital, because we were there for about a week. But I finally shared with the world that he had relapsed, and his condition, and what the plan was, the medical care plan. I shared everything, and I have shared everything since then. Some of the most intimate details of my entire life I've shared with the world, because there are people out there that feel like they are alone. They are struggling because they are isolated, because they haven't told the truth about what really lives in their everyday life.
So true.
So don't keep those things to yourself. You're not alone. And I can tell you another thing. I have been met with absolutely zero resistance. There has been no one that has attacked me, so to speak, because of the things that I have shared and put out there. And a lot of the things that I have said are pretty controversial in many people's eyes, but I have been met with no adversity,
Yeah.
There is nothing that anyone can say about my son, about my family, about me, about our life, the way we live, the way we worship, that I haven't already told you. So there is
Amen.
nothing left for me to be ashamed of.
So good.
And
Preach.
if you drag that darkness into the light, no one can use that against you.
Yeah.
Oh, what are you, just repeating something that I've already said? Like, there will always be naysayers, and don't let fear drive you away from
Yes.
sharing what you're experiencing, no matter where you are in that walk.
Yeah.
Because you have to talk about it. If you don't talk about it, you're not making progress.
That's right.
And if you're scared, if you're experiencing fear, that's okay, because what that is the works of Satan that is intended to keep you quiet and silence you, so that you won't share the good word that you have to tell other people about what can actually help and save you and your loved one.
That's right.
That's how you know that it's really going to reach someone, and that there is someone out there, even if it's only one person. We were called to go after our one.
Yeah.
One at a time. But you have to speak about it. You have to tell it, and you can't keep it to yourself.
So good.
If you do, then you're part of this epidemic. It just remains dark. It remains silent, and there's no one that's going to know about it. But there's no shame in this. There should be no secrets in this, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise.
Yeah, it's so good. You know, I exactly what you're saying right now is the essence of what we believe at the Hope Project. That's why we always say that this is a safe place to talk about hard things, because we know that people need to be in a culture where they can talk about the hard things, like the things that you just talked about. We really have tried to create a safe place here where people can really reach out, get resources. If you're struggling, we're here for you. We're not here to judge you. I'm a former heroin addict who has had a less than perfect past, and we all come from broken, messy backgrounds. And that's really what unites us, is the things that we've brought to light, the things that we've been able to talk about that really hurt, but they hurt a lot less when you can talk about them and give God a whole lot of glory from talking about them. So thank you again so much for your bravery, not just for being here today, but for everything you're doing for the cause to end overdose. Amanda has just done so much great work and is continuing to do more work. She's getting certified in it's a grief counseling right now, right?
The grief method.
So
the grief method. It's a certification for grief recovery for people who are living in the aftermath of losing a loved one.
Yeah.
Not only to addiction, but to a lot of different things.
Which is so great, and I love to see when people turn their pain into purpose, that mess into a message, and that's exactly what she's doing. She's saying, "Hey, I'm gonna deal with it. I'm gonna talk about it, but I'm gonna help other people that are going through what I went through." And I think that better than going to school and getting a PhD is actually living through it and becoming the person that says, "Hey, I haven't read about what you're going through. I've been through what you're going through, and that's how I can talk about it." And so I just know that you are going to just do so much great work through that, and we're excited to see how we can all kind of partner through that. And so thank you for your bravery. Thank you for all you're doing to help eradicate overdose. Thank you for the fact that you and your amazing husband, John, are such an integral part of what we do at the Hope Project. They have been faithful volunteers for a long time, and just been super willing to share their story for God's glory, and just super thankful for you. And so if you're interested in learning more about overdose signs and symptoms, what to look for in people, maybe some ways to save some lives, we do a Narcan training twice a month. Our next one is this Friday, September 4th at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can find all the information about our Narcan classes at thehopeproject.cc/save lives. Would love for you to go check that out. But thank you again so much, Amanda, for being such a special and brave guest today on Real Raw Conversations. Real Raw Conversations is a production of the Hope Project. And remember, guys, the Hope Project really is a safe place to talk about hard things. We love you guys so much. We are here for you. If it was your first time watching today, please text WELCOME to 843-233-9684, and we would love to get to know you. And if you are a family member who has been affected by, or just a loved one who's been affected by addiction, would you text the word recovery to 843-233-9684? That's going to give us the opportunity to reach out to you and maybe even get you connected with Amanda and have her walk with you through some stuff, because I'm telling you, you've got to bring that stuff that you're dealing with to light. Like Amanda said, you've got to deal with it, but you need to deal with it in a safe culture. And like I said, we are a safe place to talk about hard things. There's no judgment here. And we're just here for you. We started this ministry to be a resource, an evangelical, Jesus-loving resource that isn't going to shove religion down your throat, but is going to love you like Jesus loves you, and is going to help you, give you a hand up, not a handout of the hopeless situations that you may be dealing with. So if you need help, reach out for help today. Again, we're a judgment-free zone. We would just love to get to know you and help you flesh this thing out, walk this thing out that you're going through. So again, thank you so much, Amanda, for being here. You are just such a brave person. You're just a phenomenal example of what a real Christ follower looks like. Hope in adversity and faith over fear. And I just have so much respect for you and love you so much, like a sister. So thanks again for being here. Thanks everybody. Yes, thank you. And thank you everybody for watching. Would you please share this out on your timeline on Facebook or Instagram? If you're watching on YouTube, share the link to help us to get this life-saving message out. People need to hear Amanda's story. And so would you help us help other people hear that by sharing this with the world, man? We're trying to get 100,000 shares on this. So we can really get this in the hands of people and get some people well. So we love you guys again so much, and we hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next time.